Good morning, everyone. My name's Sylvia Passmore, and I'm the manager of the Post-Transfer Agreements Unit. And my fellow manager, Lorne Markin. And we're here today to talk about the novation process. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and the Musqueam First Nations. And I'd like to say a special good morning to all the chiefs, health directors, leaders, our Health Canada staff that are with us today. So this presentation is all about novation, and we have some objectives, and we want to answer the basic question, what is novation? We want to share the steps and the key dates for this agreement novation. We want to review the draft novation agreement, and we would like to answer your questions. What is novation? Novation is the moving or a shift of contribution agreement ownership or responsibility. Now, when we first started doing this work about how the contribution agreements were going to move from Health Canada to the First Nation Health Authority, and they talked about this novation, first of all, I said, what does that word mean? So I went running to my dictionary, my Oxford dictionary that I keep close to my desk, and the word wasn't in there. So a little bit of Googling on the internet there and found out it's a legal word. And Mr. Jim Adams from our session earlier from Schweckham, he was saying that he has what's called a Black's dictionary, which is a legal dictionary, and he found the word in there. So it isn't a common term, and this is sort of new for all of us. Also, in my computer, when the word novation comes up on a document, it says it's spelled incorrectly. It comes up red. And the spell check wants to turn it into ovation. So this moving or shift of the contribution agreements is to take effect October 1st, 2013. And that's coming up really quite quickly. And how will we do this? How will we shift this responsibility? This will be done by a separate, standalone, three-party novation agreement. And that agreement's going to be between Health Canada, the First Nations Health Authority, and the recipient of the contribution agreement. Now, in working out this process of novation, it was very important to have some founding principles on which to base the work. And Health Canada and the First Nation Health Authority are both committed to a seamless transition process. Do not wish to interrupt service delivery on the ground or the operations of those that receive the contribution agreements. Also, we want to make sure that the existing contribution agreements are honored, and that there's, again, no disruption to ongoing funding to the communities. We want to make sure that the seamless transition in terms of the monthly or quarterly payments to recipients. And where we can, to make some administrative improvements. Lauren's going to take it from here. We do a little bit of back and forth, which has been working quite well.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Usually it's Joseph and I are bouncing off. One's wearing a tie, one's not, but today we're both wearing a tie, so it works out quite well. Wanted to continue on with the BC Tripartite Framework Agreement on First Nations Health Governance was signed October 13th, 2011, not October 31st, which was originally the error in the first draft we had, and it was spotted actually in the Kelowna session. Going through it, we found the error, and I'm thinking, oh geez, how many people has this gone through? And it still has errors in it. So fix that one up by the province of BC, Canada, and the First Nations Health Society, and endorsed by the First Nations Health Council. The framework agreement references the novation of the contribution agreements in Schedule 5 subsection 7 on page 57. I'm just going to use your papers here. So, why novation? Well, in order to implement the tripartite framework agreement, and this transfer also enables the First Nations Health Authority to design and deliver health programs that better meet the needs of First Nations communities in BC. This is a big thing for us with respect to trying to transition all of the agreements that have multiple durations right now and multiple end dates. We have 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 10-year agreements. So we had to really put our heads together to try to figure out, how do we do this that actually makes sense? And this novation process is what we've come up with, and the novation agreement. Novation, how it works. Agreements expiring March 31st, 2013 and 2014 will receive extensions until March 31st, 2015. So in essence, what we're doing is we're confirming the length of agreements until a minimum of March 31st, 2015. Because we have agreements right now that are expiring March 31st, 2013, this year, and also March 31st of next year. So we wanted to make sure that we have that window where everybody continues on. All the contribution agreements continue, and there's no closures, or there's no expiries. Recipients moving forward into new agreement types, effective April 1, 2013, will have the new agreements with the standard durations. So what does that mean? Well, we've got some communities right now that are in the process of work plan development and health plan development. And if a community develops a work plan, they move from a set agreement into a flexible agreement. And we've got a small number of those that are getting ready with their work plans submitted, and we're going through the review committee process right now. So they'll be, once the plans are approved, they'll be establishing a new flexible agreement for effective April 1, 2013. Those will be for the standard duration. So in other words, if it's a 5-year agreement that they're looking for, that's what they'll get. They can range anywhere from 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the funding will basically be the ongoing funding, but all of the core fund, or all of the core and the targeted funding will all be up to March 31st, 2015, just like the rest of the agreements. So that's what that reference is. There's only a small number of those, but we wanted to make sure we reference them. The April 2013 amendments and the agreements will include the normal adjustments and the other program funding additions for 13-14 and 14-15. This is big. Normally, what we'll do is, and I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with that, is we'll do amendments on a quarterly basis through the integrated unit, or the transfer development unit, and the post-transfer unit, and we'll add the program funding as we receive it in the region. What we're doing here is we're putting all of the funding that we normally get, which includes the annual adjustments, we're putting them all in April. So in other words, rather than waiting till say July or October or November or January for the program annual adjustments, those are going to go in for April, in April 1st, 2013. And it's not only going to be for this year, but it's going to be for next year. Okay. Also, the home and community care funding, which normally goes in an annual basis, we're putting it in for 2 years. So this is very busy. It's already starting to ramp up already with us. We're getting ready for the implementation of the April round of amendments and agreements. We're putting everything in as much as we know right now for all of 2013-14 and 14-15. So you'll see all of that funding in there in your contribution agreement. Big. Very, very big for us. The Novation next steps. The Novation package, between March and May of 2013, the BC region will be sending out the following to all the recipients for all the contribution agreements. One will be an information letter from Health Canada and the First Nations Health Authority, co-signed. That information letter will basically explain the novation process and what we're doing, kind of like what we're doing here today. It'll be a little summary of everything that we're doing with respect to the novation process. Second will be the original contribution agreement and the amendment for 2013 and 2014, which takes effect April 1st of this year. So you're going to get your original agreement, and you're also going to get the amendment, which we're putting all the funding in for April 1st. You're also going to get the three-party novation agreement. That's a separate agreement. It's about 11 pages long. We're going to go through that today with you. What we found is spending some time up front and going through it specifically with everybody, and we do a little bit of it word for word because it's helpful for people to understand. You'll be getting that as a separate document in there also. It'll be pre-completed for you, and it'll be there for signing. And the last piece is going to be an electronic deposit interface form for the First Nations Health Authority. We're trying to get prepared as much as possible right now, so we're doing everything up front as much as possible. So you're going to be getting this package between March and May of 2013. We've already started to kind of assemble some of these pieces just based on what information we have right now, because we want to make sure it gets out on a timely basis to you. think this is where I hand it over to Sylvia now.
So the key dates for the agreement novation process. We're just, this is our 5th session, information session, that we've been having for the past 5 weeks. The novation and the contribution agreements, novation agreement and the contribution agreements, the package Lorne spoke of, will be mailed out between March and May. And typically those are for the amendments to be effective April 1st. But as we know, we don't always have the amendments out before April. We'd like to. But the amendments will be going out anywhere time between March and May. And that package will be quite important, and we'll have stickies to make sure everyone knows where to sign. And we certainly want the contribution agreement amendment signed, as well as the novation agreement, and pay particular emphasis to the electronic deposit form. Because we find that the electronic deposits that we have with the First Nations work very well, instead of the old snail mail checks. And may as well take advantage of that technology and keep the payment process smooth. So the novated contribution agreements with the First Nation Health Authority would take effect October 1st, 2013. So even though that novation agreement gets signed in April or May, the payments from the Health Authority wouldn't occur until October 1st. So Health Canada is still responsible for those contribution agreements, April, May, June, July, August, and September. Now, what happens if recipients don't sign the third-party novation agreement? Certainly the recipients can sign the contribution agreement and return it to us, because we want to make sure that the amendment for April to September is processed. If we don't receive back the three-party novation agreement, we'll contact the recipients to talk about it. We'll want to talk to you and say, why haven't you signed that? Okay. And if necessary, the next step for us would be to issue what's called a termination notice. In the contribution agreements already, there's a termination clause. It's been there for a long, long time. Quite honestly, I can't remember the last time either the recipient exercised it or we exercised it. But for the purposes of achieving this movement of ownership of the contribution agreements and implementing the tripartite framework agreement, by June 15th, if we have not received back the signed novation agreement, we'll be issuing that termination notice. So that would be a 90-day notice with the recipient, so that you know that the agreement will be ending on September 30th. Now, one very important point is, if we issue that notice, we'll want to come out and meet with you and talk about it. Okay? You can change your mind, and you can sign the agreement after the notice has been issued. So what if recipients don't sign the novation agreement? Just like I mentioned, the termination notice takes effect September 30th. The plan is for the First Nation Health Authority to have a replacement agreement ready. And the replacement agreement will have the same terms, the same conditions, the same funding as the existing Health Canada contribution agreement. So at this point, Lorne is going to walk through the three-party novation agreement, and following that, I think would probably be a coffee break before we get into the questions. Thank you.
I'll give you back your glasses. There you go. One of the things, I'm not sure whether it was mentioned or not, is we're going to take questions and answers after the presentation, because what we found is, based on the prior four presentations we did, we went a little bit over when we started incorporating questions into the presentation, when unfortunately we didn't get a chance to finish. So if we could hold questions until the end, and then there'll be a Q&A session at the end. And we found that works much better. So if you can hold your questions until then, and we'll just continue with the presentation until it's complete. One of the things I'd like to do now is, you do have a copy of the the February 15th draft of the Novation, three-party Novation agreement. This is the one that has been presented to all of the attendees from all of the 4 sessions. Now we're moving into the 5th session. There has been some slight, there's been some discussions and some slight adjustments to it, but we wanted, for consistency purposes, we're going to go with this review, this template, because in that way everybody gets the same information. Once the finalized version is done, which was, let's hope, tomorrow or Friday, we're hoping. Once it's done, finalized, if there's any changes or adjustments based from this template, we'll incorporate that in the Novation package so you know exactly what was changed, okay? So we'll make sure that that information's in there. We want to make sure everybody gets the same information at the same time. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through the document. Page 1 is the three-party Novation agreement, and of course these are more of the preambles that initiate the three-party Novation agreement. Again, it stands on its own. This is something that is signed separate from the contribution agreement. It's separate from the amendment, but it all goes together as a package. Okay? So the first parts are just basically naming who's involved in this Novation agreement, and again, it is three-party. It's pursuant to the BC Tripartite Framework Agreement on First Nations Health Governance between Her Majesty the Queen, in the right of Canada as represented by the Minister of Health, the Minister, and the First Nations Health Authority, a not-for-profit society incorporated under the Society Act of British Columbia with its head office on the Squamish Indian Reserve in West Vancouver, also referred to as the FNHA, and the recipient. And this is where we will be pre-filling all the information for all the contribution agreement recipients so that when you get this document, it will be already pre-filled. And we'll be tagging everything for where signatures need to go also. Now, the recitals. This is, in essence, what this document refers to. And it's going to make reference to the contribution agreement, and of course the contribution agreement number, which everybody in the Pacific region has PA, and that's what PA stands for, Pacific. I don't know if everybody knew that, but we've got a few people that work in the office that still don't, not sure what PA stands for. I quizzed a few people yesterday, and some were right, some were wrong, but it's the PA stands for Pacific, just so that everybody knows. Yeah. And the recitals are, in essence, referencing the agreements. Now, there was some interesting conversation. Grand Chief Doug Kelly referred to some of the discussions we had when this started. And it was interesting because the first draft we saw was a little bit less than perfect. So we had an opportunity to have some feedback, which was good, and we much appreciated that. And one of the things that the folks out of headquarters were really keen on was, well, let's include all the amendments with the package, you know. So in other words, we'll give you the agreement, we'll give you all the amendments, and we'll print them all, and we'll put them in with the Novation package. And we looked at them and said, do you realize how much paper that is? Some amendments are, there's like 14 amendments in every contribution agreement in some cases, because they're very long. Agreements range anywhere from 1 to 10 years. So we managed to get them past that, and now we only have a listing of the amendments. And the only amendment you're actually going to see in the package is the amendment for April 1st, 2013, which has all the other amendments referenced inside it anyway. So you can thank us for the savings on the trees, okay? So the recitals, the Minister and recipient entered into a health funding contribution agreement bearing agreement number, and that'll be the PA number, on the date, which is the date of the signing for the original agreement. The contribution agreement was amended by way of the following amendments, and we'll include all this information with respect to which ones were dated and signed. B, in accordance with the framework agreement, the Minister wishes to novate the Canada CA, which is the Canada Contribution Agreement, including all of the Minister's rights, liabilities, duties, and obligations under and in respect of the Canada CA to the FNHA. And the FNHA wishes to accept the novation, and, page 2, the recipient wishes to consent to the novation and to accept the FNHA as its sole counterpart with respect to the novated CA from the novation date forward. So in essence, what we're saying here is the FNHA is taking over for Health Canada in the administration of this contribution agreement, in essence. Now the next phase is the definitions. That's the next section. And the definitions include annual audit, which would be the annual audit as defined in the Canada CA and the novated CA. And we would use this and then there's a little notation there, use for all Canada CAs except the standalone set funding, because of course if you have a set agreement, there isn't a requirement for an audit. It's just a year-end financial report. So they wanted to put a little bit of a rider in there. The annual report means the annual report required for program reporting purposes under the Canada CA and the novated CA. Canada CA has the meaning set out in Recital A. The Canada Funding Agreement means the funding agreement between the Minister and the FNHA to provide the funding to the FNHA for the transfer of federal health programs under the Framework Agreement. So that's the big Canada Transfer Agreement. Not necessarily this one, but the big, large one. Fiscal year means any period commencing on April 1st of any year and terminating on March 31st of the year immediately following. Framework Agreement means the BC Tripartite Framework Agreement on First Nations Health Governance, signed on October 13th, 2011. Nice to see we fixed that, and it's not Halloween Day anymore. Novated or novation means the process set out in Section 3.1, and novated CA means the Canada CA as novated pursuant to this agreement. Novation date means the Phase 2 transfer date under the Canada Funding Agreement, which is expected to be October 1, 2013. Novation fiscal year has the meaning set out in Section 7.2, subsection 1, and year-end financial report means the year-end financial report required pursuant to the Canada CA and the novated CA, and note, use only for the Canada CAs that are set, or the standalone. Section 2, some of the general comments. 2.1 is commencement, which the agreement will take effect when it is signed by all three parties. And Section 3 is the novation. The parties hereby agree to the novation of the Canada CA, which means that on and from the novation date, the FNHA and the recipient will be deemed to have entered into a new agreement between themselves, commencing on the novation date, the novated CA, having terms that are identical to those of the Canada CA as amended in accordance with Section 7 of this agreement, and the Canada CA will therefore after be deemed to be terminated as between the minister and the recipient. So when the First Nations Health Authority takes responsibility of the contribution agreement, terms and conditions remain the same. Nothing changes, except for the fact that Health Canada, the minister, is no longer part of that agreement after the novation date. Okay. Section 4, the minister. One of the things that we found was the best for laying out this agreement, or this novation agreement, was sectioning off the responsibilities of each party. So in here you'll see the responsibility for the minister, you'll see the responsibilities for the recipient, and also the responsibilities for Health Canada. Initially when we saw it, it was kind of a mix of everything, and one of the things that we've constantly tried to maintain for feedback to our national colleagues and the legal group is let's keep the novation agreement as common look and feel, like in other words, similar to your existing contribution agreement. It's what you're used to. Contribution agreements really haven't changed that much in the last many years, so we wanted to make sure that it was similar in the same way. So Section 4, the minister. The minister will provide funding to the recipient and undertake all of her other obligations and enjoy all of her rights under the Canada CA until the day prior to the novation date. 4.2, post-novation. On and from the novation date, the Canada CA will be deemed to be terminated, okay, but the minister will remain entitled to any rights and benefits that may have accrued under provisions of the Canada CA prior to the novation date which survive termination or expiry, including but not limited to the rights to receiving all program and financial reports due from the recipient under Canada CA in accordance with the Canada CA or Section 7.2 to 7.5 of the agreement that relate to the period prior to the novation date, undertake any audit provided for in the Canada CA for any period prior to the novation date, and if necessary, exercise any default, remedial, and collection steps under the Canada CA in relation to any default by the recipient that occurred prior to the novation date. Breathe. And B, remain obliged to fulfill any obligations that may have accrued under provision of the Canada CA prior to the novation date, including any obligation to pay any amounts due in respect to the period prior to the novation date. So what does that mean? Well, in essence, if there's reports outstanding, or if there's anything that the minister is responsible for from April 1st to September 30th, the minister's still on the hook, okay? Whether it's responding to reports, or payables, or recoverables, or anything to that sort, if it's tied to that period of time, they're still obligated. Just because the agreement basically moves over to the First Nations Health Authority doesn't mean that the obligations stop. They don't, okay, especially for that period. Okay, so 4.3 release. 4.2. The minister will not be party to the novated CA and will owe no duties or obligations to the recipient or the FNHA under the novated CA. And of course, that's after novation date. 4.3, release. with effect on and from the novation date and subject to section 4.2, the minister releases and discharges the recipient from any obligations it would have owed the minister arising after the novation date under the Canada CA had it not been novated. So in other words, after for any activities post-novation date, the minister has no claim. Section 5, the FNHA. What are the obligations of the First Nations Health Authority? Pre-novation, so which is in essence pre-October 1st. The First Nations Health Authority will have no rights, duties, or obligations to the recipient or the minister for any matter relating to the Canada CA and the period prior to the novation date except as provided under this agreement. Post-novation. On and from the novation date, the FNHA will accept the novation of the Canada CA in accordance with Section 3.1 and obtain all of the rights and interests and undertake and perform all duties and obligations formerly of the minister of under the Canada CA as novated under this agreement, including the obligation to provide funding to the recipient, but excluding the matters set out in sections 4.1 and 4.2-1, subsection 1 of this agreement. So that's the FNHA's responsibilities. Last one is the recipient, section 6. Consent. The recipient consents to the novation described in this agreement. Pre-novation. The recipient will be responsible to the minister for fulfilling the terms and conditions of the Canada CA until the novation date. Post-novation. On and from the novation date, the recipient will accept the FNHA as its sole counterparty with respect to the novated CA and abide by the terms of the novated CA, including the delivery of any financial and program reporting that is due to the FNHA which relates to the period after the novation date, subject to in accordance with section 7.2 to 7.5 of this agreement, and abide by the terms of the Canada CA which survive the novation in accordance with section 4.2 subsection 1, including the delivery of any financial and program reporting that is due to the minister which relates to the period prior to the novation date, subject to and in accordance with section 7.2 to 7.5 of this agreement. So once October 1st comes and goes, that doesn't mean if you haven't submitted your reporting that you don't have to the minister. You still do. Okay, so the reporting is still outstanding. That comes back to Health Canada. For post-October 1st, if it's activities post that date, then that reporting goes to the FNHA. Release. With effect on and from the novation date, the recipient releases and discharges the minister, subject to section 4.2(1)(b), from any and all duties and obligations that the minister would have owed the recipient following the novation date under the Canada CA had it not been novated, and agrees to make no claim or demand against the minister in respect of any claim it may have against the FNHA under the novated CA. So in other words, it's just another clarification piece around after the novation date, Health Canada and the minister step out of the picture on that administration of the contribution agreement. Okay. Section 7. Procedures to facilitate novation and simplify the novation fiscal year reporting. And a common question we're getting from everybody is how do you do the reporting when you're doing a mid-year transfer? Okay. Waivers. The minister and the recipient hereby at the moment of novation waive the no assignment provision of the Canada CA in order to permit the novation. One of the things in the existing contribution agreement you have right now, there's a no assignment clause. One of the things to make this novation happen is we need to remove that clause because right now it prevents us from doing that and shifting it to the First Nations Health Authority. So that's what that clause is about. The minister hereby waives its right to receive a separate year-end financial report / audit report in favor of a single combined version with the FNHA in accordance with Section 2 of this agreement. Note, each novation agreement will be amended to refer to either a year-end financial report or an audit, depending on the funding model, of course, as applicable to the relevant CA, and the definitions will be adjusted accordingly. A separate annual report in favor of a joint annual report with the First Nations Health Authority in accordance with Section 7.5. A lot of discussion around this one, because in an ideal world, you'd of course have reporting going to Health Canada for the first half of the year and then reporting to the First Nations Health Authority for the next part, or the latter half of the year, because of course it's different funders. But what's been agreed to here is it'll be one report, one audit, one financial report, one program report or program activity report covering the entire fiscal year. Okay? Now there is some slight changes, some slight adjustments in here, some slight riders, we might say, and I'll get into those in a few minutes. And I know that there's been further discussions around that. We'll clarify that once we have final approval of this document. We'll clarify those in the package, as I noted before. So, annual financial reporting obligations. For the purpose of providing year-end financial reporting under the Canada CA and the Novated CA for the April 1st, 2013 to March 31st, 2014 fiscal year, which is the Novation fiscal year, the recipient will prepare one combined year-end financial report or annual audit in respect to the full Novation fiscal year. The single combined year-end financial report or audit referred to in paragraph 1 must include, okay, 1, a breakdown into pre- and post-Novation periods, and 2, a total as follows for A, the ministerial funding period, April 13th or April 1st, 2013 to the Novation date, and B, the FNHA funding period, Novation date to March 31st, 2014, and a total. So in this case, there has to be some kind of information, and normally there'll be a breakdown, but it doesn't have to be a separate audit. I want to make that very, very clear. We're not looking for separate audits here. It could be a notation within the audit itself, if it's a financial audit, or if it's a year-end report, it's just basically a notation of the breakdown of April 1 to September 30th and October 1 to March 31st, 2014. The breakdown required in subsection 2 may be provided in the notes or a schedule to the year-end financial report or the annual audit. And again, there's been more discussion around this. We don't have the final outcomes on that, but we'll clarify as soon as we have the final draft. This has been a strong area of discussion, a high area of discussion for us in all the other prior 4 sessions. And we've had some very good feedback from communities and recipients on this one. Some very, very positive and very helpful feedback. Note, use this clause for cases where there is an annual audit. The single combined annual audit referred to in subsection 2 will consist of a single audit covering both periods with a single opinion from the auditor. That seemed to be a common point of question is do we need 2 opinions? No, you only need 1 from the auditor and need not consist of separate audits or opinions. 5, the recipient will deliver a copy of the single combined year-end financial report or annual audit to each of the minister and the FNHA at the time the year-end financial report annual audit is due under the Novated CA. We'll sort out the reporting piece more as we get closer to that date. That's at that time, which is probably going to be over a good year and a half from now, and we'll get more information on that. But they just wanted to clarify basically just for the purposes of this activity and this template. Repayment obligations. The recipient will ensure that its final year-end financial report or audit clearly sets out any repayable surpluses, if any, deficits, if any, and repayment obligations for ineligible expenses or other debts due to the Crown in right of Canada or the FNHA for each of the pre- and post-Novation periods of the Novation fiscal year set out in section 7.2, 2A and B. The recipient will pay to the minister any repayable surpluses, ineligible expenses, or other debts due to the Crown in right of Canada that relate to the pre-Novation period referred to in subsection 7.2.2a no later than the date of delivery of final reporting for the Novation fiscal year unless the minister and recipient agree to a payment plan that permits repayment over another period of time. And the recipient will pay to the FNHA any repayable surpluses, ineligible expenses, or other debts due to the FNHA that relate to the post-Novation period referred to in subsection 7.2.2b no later than the date for delivery of final reporting for the Novation fiscal year unless the FNHA and the recipient agree to a payment plan that permits repayment over and above or over another period of time. Now again, there's been some further discussions around how to smooth some of this out, so more to come on this one overall. NIHB reporting frequency. Good news on NIHB reporting. There's less NIHB reporting. There will be only one interim financial report and one interim program activity report due from the recipient for the April 1, 2013 to the Novation date period, which would be, of course, October 1, for any NIHB programs funded under the Canada CA. These reports will be due at such times following the period that are consistent with the usual delivery times for interim reports in the Canada CA. So reporting periods don't change at all, and actually this is an improvement because it's one less report now for that period. The recipient will provide one financial and one program activity report for NIHB programs as funded by the Canada CA and the Novated CA for the full Novation fiscal year in its year-end financial report or annual audit or its annual report. Okay, 7.5, annual program reporting obligations. For the purpose of providing year-end program reporting under the Canada CA and the Novated CA, the recipient will prepare a joint annual report for the full Novation fiscal year. So again, you don't have to break that up. It's just one fiscal year report. The recipient will deliver a copy of the joint annual report referred to in subsection 1 to each of the minister and the FNHA at the time it is due under the novated CA, and we'll sort out more of those details when that time gets closer. And conflict. Doug's favorite word, conflict. All financial reporting provisions of the Canada CA and the novated CA will be deemed to be modified and amended to the extent required by the conditions of 7.2 to 7.5 of this agreement. In the event of a conflict between the financial reporting provisions of this Canada CA or the novated CA and Section 7.2 to 7.5 of this agreement, the conflict will be resolved in favor of Section 7.2 to 7.5 of this agreement. So when it comes to reporting requirements, this is the primary document to use as a guide. And again, there's been some smoothing around the reporting piece. That's just in the fine-tuning stages and the finalization. So from what I've heard, it's positive. So we'll leave it at that. Interpretation of certain Crown clauses in the novated CA. The First Nations Health Authority and the recipient agree to interpret all provisions of the novated CA in a purposeful manner which respects the intention of the original parties. All references to the minister, ministerial, or the Crown in the novated CA will be read and construed as if they were references to the FNHA. So in other words, we've basically taken the same agreement, and in essence, any time that you see minister or ministerial or Crown, it's going to be the FNHA. Okay, so nothing's really changed in the terms and conditions of the agreement except for the references. Notwithstanding subsection 1, the following conditions will be deemed to be inapplicable and excluded from the novated CA. There's two key ones here. One is the parliamentary appropriations condition for the provision of funding. Well, that ties to funding as per Parliament funding. So that wouldn't apply here because now you're working with the First Nations Health Authority. So that's one that's out. And then the reference to the Crown Liability and Proceedings Act in the funder's indemnity provision. And that, of course, because we're not tied to the Crown anymore, that wouldn't apply. Okay. Section 8, general provisions. Just some general considerations that you see in every contribution agreement that you've signed off and you've reviewed with your program coordinator or your program manager. One is consideration. This agreement and the novation process herein is entered into by the parties for good and valuable consideration, the receipt and sufficiency of which are hereby acknowledged by each of the parties. Governing law. This agreement will be governed by, interpreted, and enforced in accordance with the laws of the province of BC and the laws of Canada applicable therein. Interesting question on that one in one of the prior sessions. The First Nations Health Authority is a non-profit society. So of course, it operates in the province of BC. So that's where that reference comes from, is the fact that you're operating in BC so that the BC laws would apply. Interpretation. The captions and titles in this agreement are for convenience or reference only and will not affect the scope, intent, or interpretation of any provision, and all amendments to this agreement will be made in writing and signed by all parties. Waiver. No provision of this agreement and no event of default by any party or a provision of this agreement will be deemed to have been waived unless the waiver is in writing and signed by the other party. So again, any changes that need to happen in here, they need to be signed by everybody. The waiver by a party of default by any other party of any provision of this agreement will not be deemed to be a waiver of any subsequent default by any party of the same or any other provision of this agreement. That's taking it to the next level down. Relationship of parties. No principal agent, employer-employee, partnership, contract for services, or joint venture relationship exists or will be deemed to exist between the parties by virtue of this agreement. No party hereto will have the express or implied right to or authority to assume or create any obligation on behalf of or in the name of any other party. So in other words, you can't assign anything to somebody else and then all of a sudden I'm absolving myself of this. Or bind any other party to any contract, agreement, or undertaking with any other entity. The parties further agree not to represent themselves as such, including in any agreement with a third party. Warranty of authority. The parties warrant that their representatives who sign this agreement have the authority to do so and to bind them, and each agree to provide the other upon request with evidence of that authorization as may reasonably required. Normally, whoever would sign your contribution agreement would be the same individuals or the same group that would be signing this three-party novation agreement. Okay, if it's a quorum of council, that's who it would be. If it's a board of directors for a society, it would either be whoever basically does the signing on behalf of the society itself. Okay, board of directors, executive director, etc. But it's the same as your contribution agreement. Notices. Any notice or other communication to be given to a party under this agreement will be given in writing or in an electronic format and will be sufficiently given if delivered personally, by electronic mail, or if sent by prepaid registered mail or fax to such parties as follows. And in here you'll also see the contact individuals for the FNHA, which of course the address, facsimile, and email for Joe Gallagher. For the minister, it's Michelle Roy, who is the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, First Nations Inuit Health Branch, address and facsimile and email. And then also for the recipient, we'll be putting in the recipient details. So what we have currently on file for your contact information. Or at such other address as the party to whom such notice is to be given will have last notified to the party giving the same in the manner provided in this section. So if we have something newer for you, we'll be putting in the newer information. Any notice personally delivered, I love this one, this is good. Any notice personally delivered to a party will be deemed to have been given and received on the day it is so delivered at such address. Any notice mailed to a party will be deemed to have been given and received on the 5th business day next following the date of its mailing, provided no postal strike is then in effect, I like that term, I've never seen that one before, or comes into effect within 5 business days after such mailing. A facsimile will be deemed to be delivered to the other party on the business day on which it was transmitted to that party, provided such transmission took place between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. of such business day. That's a lot of detail. Pretty well covered everything in that one. Any party may at any time change its address for notice from time to time by giving notice to the other parties. Further assurances. The parties will from time to time and at all times hereafter, but without further consideration, do all such further acts and execute and deliver all such further deeds and documents as will be reasonably required in order to fully perform and carry out the terms and conditions of this agreement. No party will assign its rights or obligations under this agreement without the consent of the other two parties, and this agreement is legally binding upon the parties and their respective successors and permitted assigns. Section 9, execution. This agreement and any amendment may be executed and delivered by fax or by email and in counterparts, each of which that when executed and delivered is an original, but each of which is taken together constitute one and the same instrument. In witness whereof, Her Majesty the Queen and Right of Canada has executed its agreement, and this is when we're in the city of wherever it would be signed in the province of BC. The FNHA has executed this agreement, the city of, north, probably be West Vancouver, and the province, BC, and the recipient has executed this agreement at their location on the date set out below. So this is where we will be putting in the contact information for who will be signing. So at this point right now, we've confirmed for the minister it'll be Yosef Ali, the regional director. For the First Nations Health Authority it'll be Joe Gallagher. And for the recipients, it will be band council, quorum, executive directors, whoever would be signing off the contribution agreement. All of this will be pre-filled. The way we're looking and doing it right now is we'll be sending everything out in the Novation Package. The recipients will be the first signatory, and then after that it will be coming into our offices, and then we'll be administering accordingly. We're trying to make this as streamlined as possible. So that's pretty well it for the Novation template. Now again, I have to put a rider on this. There are some discussions right now in trying to smooth out some of the pieces, particularly around reporting. So when we have those final confirmations, and I think they'll be, based on what I've heard and what I've heard from folks, that they're very positive and making it that much easier. When the package goes out, we'll be including an information piece on that Novation template that's completed, so you'll know exactly what's changed from this one. Okay, so we want to be very, very clear with you. The other thing too, I think just a piece, and Christine, are we stopping for break now? No, not yet? Yeah? Okay. Just one other thing, when these are starting to come out, we're going to be tracking them, so just a heads up, please make sure that you're aware, or just keep an eye open for them. We're going to try to figure out what would be a best way to get some communication out to the communities to let them know these are coming, so that they can keep an eye out for them and make sure they're happening. I know we're running into one scenario right now where some of our amendments aren't necessarily going out because in some cases they don't deliver to post office boxes. Little things that kind of can cause some problems. So we want to make sure that these people get them, they know they're coming, and if they don't show up within a few days, somebody starts looking for it. So, should we stop for a break? One thing before we stop for break, I just wanted to recognize, we've got some of the staff from Sylvia's shop and from my shop here. I just wanted to recognize the group. We've got Gladys McLaughlin in at the table there. We've got Lorraine Plummer, and we've also got Michael Liu, one of our new additions here, and we've also got Seth Nanayakara from Sylvia's post-transfer shop. So just wanted to recognize the staff, and we've also got other program coordinators, Cheryl Mitchell and Lorraine Tang, that were unfortunately unable to be here today. So I think that's break time. Yes? And then so, Christine, break for how long? 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Or 15? 10:30. We come back at 10:30 and we'll start. We'll finish off with some more of our presentation, and then we'll take the Q&As.